All right, this week on the podcast, I am joined by Alan Casavant. Alan's been the mayor of Biddeford for the past 12 years, but I've actually known him for a lot longer than that. He mentions in the interview that I've known him since I was a kid, had him as a teacher in high school. Story I didn't share on the podcast was I remember I was in this Mr. BHS thing when I was a senior in high school, or kind of all get on stage. It's actually kind of weird in hindsight, but I was asked a question, and the question was, who's your favorite teacher? And I did not know what to say, but quickly I said Mr. Casavant. I had a whole reason why, but he was always a guy in high school that I thought was an amazing teacher. Loved his class, American Studies. He was great at what he did, and just a guy that I always kind of gravitated towards. So as I remained a citizen of Biddeford, and I've been voting in all the elections that he's run, he's a guy that I've gotten to know even better, served with in my role on the school committee, and just a guy I look up to a lot. I think when you look back at the history of Biddeford, at least over the past 50, 100 years, he's probably going to be one of those mayors that has had the most impact in a positive way. So, like I said, guy I look up to a ton. It's fun to talk to him for 45 minutes about his term as mayor. He's been involved in a lot of things, and he has a lot of insight and a lot of good stories. And it was a conversation that I really, really cherished. And when I look back at doing this podcast, it's going to be one I think I'll always remember. So I think you'll really enjoy it if you listen to the whole thing. So again, this is the Randy Forster podcast. If you can do me a favor, as always, subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Really appreciate the support with that. So thanks again for always listening. Here's Alan. Alan, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Hi, very welcome. Glad to do it.
You're on your last week as mayor of Biddeford. It's been a wild 12 years. How you feeling?
Yeah, it's a bit awkward. I'm starting to get out of the loop. People don't call me for this, that, or the other thing, and it's really bizarre. The sense of loss, I think, I don't know how I'm going to adapt to it because I've just been ingrained in it for so long.
I know. Did that start leading up to the election, or has it really been that way since the election?
It was gradual, but once I started clearing out my office, it all registered.
Yeah. So how are you feeling about things, though? You feeling positive about things, or is it just mixed emotion?
It's mixed. I think in some ways it was the right time. I'm not getting any younger. I've tried to defy that, but it's not happening. I had issues with my hearing, of course. I'm deaf in one ear because of some surgery that backfired, and that's really problematic at times. I think it's gotten worse, especially in large crowds. And when people are talking, I have to pause at times to make sure I understand exactly what they're saying. Otherwise, for example, I went to a graduation for a niece a few years ago, and every kid got up and spoke. And this one kid gets up, and I started laughing as she was speaking, and my wife elbows me, like, what are you laughing at? This is not funny. I said, because of what I heard. She said, what'd you hear? I said, well, I heard the best thing that I like about the school is the drugs. And I knew she didn't say that. But in regular conversation in crowds, I got to be really careful. Otherwise, I'll reply in a certain way, and the people look at me like, what are you talking about? Because that's nothing that they said. So because of that, I think that was the driving force in making me step back.
Yeah. Yeah, in such a role as a mayor, it's hard to be in those situations and feel like you're not confident in what people are saying and trying to fake it. So yeah, it's at the same time, 12 years has been a really good run. I don't know historically, is that one of the longest tenures of a mayor?
Yeah, I think the longest is Papa Lozier. I think he did 16 or 18 or something like that. But which is amazing because back then it was 1-year terms. So
oh wow, every year have to do that whole grind of a campaign.
Imagine that. Yeah.
Even 2 years seems like a lot. It seems like perpetually campaigning.
Yeah, when you campaign, campaign's never been one of my favorite activities. I really have to get out there and motivate myself to do it, but it can be grueling at times. And every 2 years was tough, but every 1 year, I can't even imagine.
Especially if, like you said, 16 or 18 years, it's just, you're always a candidate at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to go back to the beginning, because I know you before you were mayor. We go way back.
Yeah, you were a kid in diapers.
A kid, yeah, that level as a student in school. But it's like you've had this whole second career as a politician since I've had your class. You went into state government, and then what made you decide to run for mayor when you did?
I guess there were a number of things. I missed local government to begin with. I served on the city council for 18 years.
Yeah.
And then the city passed a charter change. It was called the Casavant rule, in which school teachers were banned from serving in the council. So I had to get off the council after those 18. And it was okay. I mean, I went and I got my master's at USM, but I still missed it. Even when I was in the legislature, I missed it. And right before, maybe a year or two before I actually got involved in running for mayor, I just thought the city was on the wrong track. And I thought that I could bring a different viewpoint and some positive energy to it. So I decided at that juncture to enter. Of course, I was in the legislature at the same time, so that made it a little bit tricky.
How so?
Because there was always the question of how I was going to be able to do both jobs. I think maybe 10 years ago or 20, not 10 years ago, but 20 or 30 years ago, it would have been possible. But smartphones and computer technology allowed me pretty much to be able to do both.
How long was there an overlap for?
4 years.
I did not even realize that. So, okay.
Yeah, then they passed a law banning anyone that runs for mayor to serve in the legislature. Something about follows me around. I'm not sure what it is.
I was going to say, what's next? I mean, Jesus Christ.
I don't know.
So what was the thing in particular that you thought was on the wrong track about Biddeford at that time? Was there a certain thing, or was it just an overall feeling?
I think it was the tone. I think Biddeford had a negative reputation. The council meetings could be bombastic, just a lot of negativity, name calling and finger pointing. I just, I always believed that Biddeford could be better. And, I think it's because of my teaching background. There's sort of an overlap. I was telling somebody this recently that when you're a teacher, there's some essentials. And one of them is you repeat over and over and over again. And then you try to connect the dots so that they can understand the concept that you're talking about. And third, you make the kid feel important, because once you do that, you got them. If they feel special, you're all set. And politics, I think, is like that too. So it really wasn't a different career. It's essentially the same career. And I just thought that by being positive and being vocal and being involved, that I could change the dynamic and get Biddeford's ship righted in the right direction.
Did you find that to be challenging up front?
Yes and no. In my first week, if it wasn't the first day, one of the department heads came up to me and said, Alan, if you can do anything in your first term, just make City Hall more professional, because if you do that, investors will come. They're not going to put any money in a community that's seen as being crazy. And so I made it a point to try to do that. I lucked out. I was blessed with some counselors that went along with that. So the tempo, the feeling was changing. And then the whole main energy thing fell right into our laps when they decided that they didn't want to do it anymore. And that was the catalyst, the explosion for everything.
So it really started on their end of things. They wanted out, and it was up to you and the city council to let them out of their arrangements, or so it's not something you chase down necessarily as much as, like you said, fell in your lap.
Yeah, I mean, when I went into office, I had these ideas about doing something about main energy because of the problems. I mean, for example, there was always the environmental problems. The odor, for example, was like every week. But there was also a psychological problem, and you probably understand this. I mean, you were an athlete, so I'm sure you're familiar with trash talking. Well, a lot of athletes during that time period were telling me that when someone was trash talking them, the incinerator and main energy of the stink was brought up in part of the conversation. So there was a psychological element that was off my radar that really struck me as being, oh my God, I didn't realize that was happening. So I understood that something had to happen. I just didn't expect that they were thinking about closing down within the first year of my being in office.
Yeah. I can echo what you're saying. Like, that MERC talk was very much a thing associated with us Biddeford people back when I was in grade school and high school. And yeah, it's kind of funny. It was before all social media was around, but I'm sure if there was social media at the time, it would have been an even bigger thing, but definitely got brought up in trash talk a lot.
When you think about it, we were labeled as Trash Town. And that terminology came from the politicians in Biddeford who used it to advance their own causes. Why would you berate and demean your own community? That's what I mean about the negativity. And so we had to get away from that and look at the positives in the community and try to build on those.
So what did you mean by making City Hall more professional when you said that? Or the people that mentioned that to you? Was it Was there specific things, like just the way business was conducted in the city council meeting specifically, or was there more to it than that?
I mean, there were council meetings that were just, could be crazy. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
just being, just yelling and screaming and name calling and so forth. But also, I think the department heads for too long had been the scapegoats of anything that had gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So the council would make the decision. If something went wrong, the department heads were blamed for it. So I thought it was important to civilize council meetings,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure there was a lot of respect. And we really did that, because if you look over the 12 years, even though the councilors disagreed on issues, they never took it personally.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, they just moved on, and after the meeting, everything is fine. And if you look at state and local government, you do not see that at all.
I was gonna say, what a great message. Like what I feel like leadership in politics learned so much from that idea alone. Just being professional and civilized and having respect for each other, because there really isn't that on the bigger levels that you get into in politics.
Yeah, but you got to remember too, Randy, is that local government's not partisan in Biddeford. Nobody cares if you're a Democrat, or Republican, or Independent.
Mm-hmm.
When you get up to the higher levels, there are games that are played because you have to adhere to the party's philosophy or dictates.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do what your leaders tell you to do, because there's power wrapped up in that. In local government, it's taxes and services. That's it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's different. So we had to change the dynamic within the council, but also we had to somehow allow department heads to do their jobs and not be subject to accusations or punishment or whatever from counselors.
And that was a big shift at the time.
Yeah.
Just how bad had it gotten over what period of time? Like, was it the past 15 years, 20 years, it just gone astray, and maybe it was like that earlier, or has it always been?
I think there was just a stretch, start maybe in the 1990s or so,
Mm-hmm.
that it was just it just got worse.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Mark Johnston in Saco, when I first became mayor, he was the mayor at the time, and he laughingly said to me, Alan, if we compare Saco politics to Biddeford politics, it's like a football game. In Saco, we play touch football. You play tackle and kick each other when you're down. So there was a public perception. In fact, I think if you talked to your parents or maybe anybody else that's older, watching a council meeting was good entertainment because it could be so raucous.
Yeah.
Now it's boring, and that's the way it should be, because you shouldn't have that emotional swinging that's going back and forth. It's just facts and data and voting. So I'm good with the boring.
I can confirm the ones that I've listened to or been to were definitely very boring, which is good. Like you said, more business probably gets done anyways that way. So that'll be definitely a good change that hopefully we can carry moving forward. How long did the whole MERC situation take to sort out? Was that a couple-year process of?
No, it was about a year. I mean,
just
less
a
than a year, actually. I mean, it moved very, very quickly. Initially, there was some discussion of maybe getting Saco involved and having us split the purchase price. But it was then decided, that's not going to work, because the land is in Biddeford and we want to be able to control our own destiny. So that was the first hurdle. And then it was all contractual and how to best put the package together. And what we ended up doing was pretty good for Biddeford. In other words, we got the recycling in, but no cost to the city.
I remember.
We bought the plan for $8 million, and there was no interest on that. They cleaned up the land to environmental standards at one part and residential standards in the bigger part of it. So overall, it was a good deal for Biddeford, and it eliminated the stigma.
Absolutely.
And we knew that once we did that, we'd get more development. You remember now, at this time, the mills are essentially vacant. I mean, Doug Sanford was doing his thing at one end, but when you look at the Lincoln and River Dam and so forth, there was nothing there.
Yeah.
And they were eyesores. So we thought that something would happen. The thing where we were wrong was the speed of the changes, because once we announced that we were purchasing that facility, investment started.
Yeah. Yeah, you got Tim Harrington, you got Port Properties. There's probably a bunch of other companies that are in there too. It's been amazing what has happened then in basically the past 10 years.
If the incinerator would have stayed, there would be no Tim Harrington and there'd be no port properties. There'd be nothing.
Yeah.
That's reality. And the money we generated through tax revenue far exceeded anything. When we bought MERC, the meeting was in City Theater and it was jammed and people were arguing against buying it. Why? Because it's the biggest taxpayer. So people could live with the stink and the negativity and the stigma because of tax dollars.
That's such an interesting thing, because it does seem like a clear-cut decision if your mindset is a certain way, but then there are other people that just don't want any change and want it to like stay the way that it was. And it's just, I'm glad the decisions were made the way that they were. It's
What's
funny.
really interesting to me is that I've learned over time is that people, you're right, they don't like change, but at Biddeford, they didn't like the status quo either. So they didn't like both. So all of a sudden it's stalemated. So what do?
Yeah.
We move forward.
I have a friend that was on the police force at one point. He was telling me about how they would chase homeless people through the building that now is the Lincoln Mill, and just how, it was wide open and dilapidated. And just we were in there a couple of weeks ago having dinner at Batson, and it's just mind blowing what is down there or in there in general versus what it used to be. And I didn't even see what it was like before. So you have a better idea than I do.
Yeah. That walking in there, I mean, it's like walking in a totally different time zone in a different city. Nobody ever expected the Lincoln to be what it is. Mm-hmm. I mean, Tim Harrington just did an exceptional job in that.
There's no place like the Lincoln.
No.
The way it's decorated, the feel when you walk in, the Batson down there, it's a top-notch facility, something that the city should be proud of. And anytime someone talks about coming into town, it's like, you got to go to the Lincoln. So,
that's the other thing too, Randy. When I first became mayor, I remember looking on Facebook, and people generally always put, when you put where do you live, it was in the Portland area. Mm-hmm. They weren't putting Biddeford. Mm-hmm. But now, if you look at it, they're putting Biddeford.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
In fact, I knew we had made it about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, when I saw an ad from Kennebunk where a business was advertising, and they said as a subtext, we're 5 minutes from Biddeford. You think 20 years ago they would have done that?
Kennebunk? Well, not at all. So one of the things that motivated me to join the school committee, and I probably told the story on the podcast before, is just in my dealings in the mortgage industry, I'd ask people where they wanted to live, and they would always say Saco, Dayton, Kennebunk, Arundel, Wells, just like this big horseshoe around Biddeford. And I was always like, why? And it was always like the schools or whatever, for whatever reason. So I'm like, I'm going to get involved in the school committee at that point. I think that started to change. I mean, is it where I would want it to be or probably where you want it to be? No, but that has started to change, which is nice. We've taken the first steps.
I agree. I think it's great. The problem is, as you know, is that the desirability has increased so much that coupled with COVID and so forth, you got a problem with shortage of housing, which is driving prices to the roof.
It's such a problem, and it's happening everywhere. It's not just a Biddeford thing. It's just it's a nationwide thing. Do I feel like the problem's magnified in Southern Maine? I kind of do. It's a place that's both desirable from a family point of view and from a second homeowner point of view and from an investment owner point of view. So there's a ton of demand in this very limited inventory area. And it's just, I don't know what fixes it, but it's definitely tough for people trying to buy their first homes or upgrade homes. That path that people used to take is just not the same path anymore when it comes to owning property, unfortunately. About the MERC area, just to kind of close the loop on that, what's the status of that? I know people talk about it all the time. I mean, Pearl Street's complete, looks great. Sidewalks look good. The infrastructure looks good. What's next for that space?
We have a group. Jim Brady's the leader of that group that has an option on the land. Before COVID, there was some anticipation that there would be buildings going up concurrently with the redevelopment of the street itself. Mm-hmm. COVID and inflation put everything on the back burner because the numbers didn't work for the developers. The borrowing price and the materials price was too high. I remember asking Harrington's people about, well, isn't the inflation going to hurt you? Oh, no, we bought it before.
Yeah.
They had everything all stockpiled. But for Brady, there was a cost. So if you look at the project today, it's still on the books. They've been before the planning board somewhere in the last few months again. They submitted to the city some new updated plans. So what you're going to see is essentially like about 5 buildings on the front, on the Lincoln Street side of the garage and out towards the back.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to remember, even with the garage, when we built the garage, it was in anticipation of those buildings being constructed and people being working in there and participating in there.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, everybody's like, "Oh my God, the garage is too big." I remember many years ago when the old middle school was built. It's now the intermediate school.
Mm-hmm.
When it opened, it was too small for the class coming in, because by state law they had to build the school according to the population that existed at that moment, not in anticipation of the larger classes behind. So I learned then, if you're going to build a garage, you want to know what's going to be there. So we built it specifically for the other buildings. So the plans are there; they're live. And my understanding is that you're going to see buildings starting to go up there in the next year and a half.
Love it. What an interesting thing that garage has become. It's almost like, when it comes to city politics, it's like that one thing where it's like you're either for it or against it. And people definitely like to talk negatively about it on social media. But I definitely understand that thought process that you described, that, if you build it, they will come kind of thing, or you have to build it in anticipation. So I feel like it kind of puts you in city leadership in a tough position, because if you would have built it small and then these things come and it's like, we don't have the necessary parking, it would have been like, wow, you guys are idiots for not making it bigger. But like, we're in this position right now where obviously it's not complete yet, so you look like idiots for building it too big. And
people, it's a very controversial topic. I mean, that was my closest election, when it was all about parking 4 years ago. And the reality is, we need a second garage in the Alfred, Maine area. Mm-hmm. So this council coming in is going to have to talk about that.
Is that even a real situation? Can we?
Yeah,
is there even space for?
We've been talking about it for the last 4 years, and so it's a reality because of the explosion of restaurants and businesses at that end of Main Street. People can't find a place to park.
Yeah,
and the other thing that's really interesting is that when you look at the garage, I went there maybe a month ago for an event at the Lincoln. I was the 422nd car in the garage,
because they have the number on that screen.
Yeah. So when you have events, there are people parking there, and I mean, it's not really that difficult. There have been issues, and of course, it's been magnified by social media. But the cost, $2 an hour, come on, it's nothing.
I don't want to be this like guy that I have you on the podcast, and it's like I just like agree with everything you say. I have not found my experience in the garage to be that difficult. So when I hear people talk about it on social media, I don't really like to chime in one way or the other, but like, I don't know, you just take the app and you pay with Apple Pay and it takes 2 cents. I don't know, like, I know people like to complain about it, but I guess if you're not like a tech person, or you're not that great with your phone or whatever, it probably can be challenging, but hopefully it gets resolved. It's someone else's problem at this point.
We've met with the owners of the garage. Remember, we've transferred ownership of the garage to a separate entity.
Yeah.
We've talked to them and the managers, and I think you'll be seeing some changes that will make things a little bit more simple.
Yeah.
In the upcoming months.
Well, the whole project's exciting. Looking forward to that construction stuff. It's I drive by it all the time, always like looking for something that's changed. And over the past few years, there's always been something, so it's, when you look back at your term, your 12 years as mayor, is that going to be the thing that like you think is most closely associated with your name, that whole area, everything that's happened down there?
I think so. I think that the purchase of the plant was a catalyst, and then you had this wave of redevelopment that just spread through the mills and into the downtown area. Mm-hmm. And I've always viewed the downtown and the mills as one. And that's why it's been really important to get some easements through the mill so that people can walk and make that all part of that connection. So I think so.
Yeah. The whole City Walk thing is going to be pretty cool, and that's done to completion. I've heard a little bit from the guys over at the levee how that's going to connect onto the railroad track, and it's going to kind of feed right in front of Pearl Street and all the places over there, and then kind of connect with North Dam Mill, if I understand correctly. Is that the plan?
Yeah, the Riverwalk's going to go and actually connect to the Eastern Trail, because you got to remember that where Diamond Match used to be, Harrington's bought all that land, and that's going to be a massive development of 400 plus units and retail. So when you come into Biddeford, you're going to see this incredible entryway. Mm-hmm. So It's exciting.
I've told you before. I told some people I had on the podcast before, we just need the railroad company to clean up that freaking railroad track. I feel like it's the
Well,
thing that needs to be done.
Pan Am was not going to do that, but Pan Am's have been sold. They got sold a year ago, so it's much more easy with the new owners. So you might see some changes there.
That'd be cool to see. A couple other things on the development front. Do you know of anything going on with that old courthouse? Is that a thing? Is that anything happening there? Like, are you aware of
By
any
the
development?
old courthouse, which one do you mean?
The old courthouse across from
All right.
Sacred Profane, because I feel like that's right to be something.
Jim Brady, the
Same
man
guy.
I mentioned earlier, owns that building. And initially, he was waiting for the opening of the Lincoln before he did anything there.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't talked to him in the past 8 months or so I'm not sure. But his intention is to actually get that converted into something that fits within the downtown in terms of what people need.
Yeah. It's a cool building. You know, it has a ton of history to it on its own, and it should be something at some point. So that's cool to hear that it's that same person.
Yeah.
And ground has been broken on the project for housing on Healthcare Drive. Is that the case?
Yeah.
When is that anticipated to be done?
Well, that's a little bit behind as well. Mike Ian originally was proposing that, but he sold it to Port Properties. And so they're rapidly putting that together. The original intention was to provide housing for people that had temporary jobs at the hospital. That would be the main core. You know, maybe nurses that are in there for 1 year or whatever it happens to be. My understanding, again, you're looking at a year and a half, and that'll be all set.
Yeah, that's exciting too. So, ton of development in town. It's constantly changing. Looking forward to what happens next. As far as when you look back at the past 12 years, do you have any regrets? Are there any things that you wish would have gone differently, or not happy with the way they turned out?
Well, a lot of it, I think, it's nothing in terms of the actions. I think some of it's just second guessing myself in terms of why didn't I see this coming? So, for example, the housing issue, I wish I would have been more anticipating what could have happened in terms of the changes. But again, COVID just blew things out of the water. So, but that still bothers me.
What could have been done differently, though? Because when you say that, it just makes me think, like, what impact as a mayor could you do to increase the inventory of housing? You still need builders, and are there certain roadblocks that builders deal with that maybe you could have lessened or removed, or how do you think you could have impacted that?
The impact could be lessened by zoning changes, which the city has done. The problem is that if you think of a city budget as a pie, and everybody's always concerned with the city budget because it affects the tax rate. If a city by itself were to assume responsibility for the construction of housing, all of a sudden you either have to enlarge the pie or cut somewhere else to keep the pie the same so you don't raise taxes. And so the stumbling block always is, how do we engage state dollars, federal dollars, private contractors in the city in terms of the construction of affordable housing? And it's something that Maine has never done because we never had an issue, right? I mean, there was never an issue in Biddeford. We had cheap housing. People would come to Biddeford for the cheap housing. They don't do it anymore because there isn't any more cheap housing. But it's just trying to figure that out. And quite frankly, there's no magic wand. There's nothing by itself that solves the problem. It's going to take a lot of efforts. And as you indicated earlier, it's not just a local problem. It's everywhere.
It really is. Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's Biddeford or any town in Maine for that matter. So, yeah, it's definitely something that people talk about. I feel like it's a conversation I have at the dinner table with friends or people in my business. So it's something that needs to be addressed, but I haven't seen a good solution for it. I mean, yeah, people throw out the idea of government housing, but like you said, it's if that money gets spent, then something else has to go or taxes are going up. So, and no one likes that.
Again, by state law, people have to understand that all tax policy is governed by the state of Maine. The city of Biddeford or any other city cannot waver from that at all. You got to do what the law says. So the state has said that city budgets are essentially contingent upon the mill rate, right? Property taxes, that's the core. I mean, there are others, the excise tax and revenue sharing, but we get the bulk from property taxes. And I can argue till I'm blue in the face. The property tax as it's constructed today is unfair because the assumption is that when you live in a house that has X value, your wealth is measured by that value. When we know darn well that because of the rising rates your wages aren't going up,
Mhm.
matching what the value of the house is. So you're always falling behind. And if you're in a fixed income, good luck with that.
Absolutely, yeah. You're in a very tough situation if that's the case. Most people don't understand that, though, about the role that the state plays in our local taxes. It's
You're right.
just,
I
it's a
mean,
huge
people were nuts
misconception.
with the reval, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
That we just took. I mean, they're, oh my God, my house went up so much. That's by state law. And if you don't do the reval, you get punished by reductions in veterans fees that come back to veterans and all this other stuff. It's like, you got to do it.
You've taken an active role on social media in your term
Yeah.
to try to explain things to people. Do you feel like those efforts were well done? I mean, I feel like they were. I learned a lot in a lot of your posts. Very thoughtful. Try to explain things to some people. It's falling on deaf ears, obviously, but you felt like you needed to do it a lot of times.
Yeah. You got to understand that when I did that, I'd be writing saying, oh my God, I know this is going to blow up.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people will just not listen to what I have to say because they know that they are right. But I just felt that sometimes it was important to correct the misinformation. I mean, I'll be honest, I hate social media.
Yeah.
Because it's just fueled by rumor and misinformation, and people just jump on the first thing they read and never question the source. Before social media, I mean, you knew who not to believe. You knew the chronic liars, you knew the fools and whatever. But today, in today's age, everybody is equal in social media. So you never know if what you're hearing is truth or just a fairy tale.
Well, all you have to do is hear it once, and if it kind of makes sense to you at the time, or it conforms with like what you're predisposed to thinking, like that's the truth, and then getting someone to move off from that is close to impossible. And I've seen it play out. It plays out in a funny way in local politics. Just probably more than any topic, at least that I see. It's wild to see some of the stuff that people say and their opinions, and I like reading it so I stay up to date with things, but like I never would want to be one of those people that interacts with it. But like here you are, you're almost forced to some degree, just because you feel like you probably have to correct some of the confusion or misinformation. And I don't envy you in that way, but I thought you've done a nice job over the years trying to interject when you can.
Trust me, it's not my favorite activity to do that because I know the bullets are flying back in my direction, usually by the same people.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough. Outside of housing, which again is a big problem everywhere, what do you think some of the biggest challenges that Biddeford are facing?
Wages are going to be really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Wages for police, fire, public works, city hall staff. If you look at the averages in the state of Maine, they're all going up. And so if you want to retain and attract workers, the only option is you've got to raise rates as well. What's happening is that cities and towns are competing with each other and cherry picking employees from each other and giving them bonuses. I mean, we had a guy that left somewhere in the last 6 to 8 months, $15,000 signing bonus and a higher wage. I mean, what are you going to do, right? So the council is going to have to look at the contracts and talk about whether or not to bump up the salaries of our staff. I got to tell you, there's going to be people say, let them walk. The thing is, when you have, we'll say, police or fire, you want someone with experience showing up at your door when you need them. And training people takes time. So losing people, when you lose all that institutional memory and all that knowledge, it just doesn't work. And so you're going to see a possible budget hit because of salaries.
Yep.
It's going to be tough. And what's tougher, as I told someone today, is that inherently I think taxpayers and their wages clash with what the public sector is going to have happening now. It's just going to, I don't know how it's going to play out, but I just know there's going to be anger. And again, it's going to be fueled by misinformation. But the new council is going to have to grapple with that.
Well, I see it on the school committee. I mean, how many meetings have we had over the past 4 years that I've served with you where it's, we got to up the janitor's pay, we got to up the bus drivers pay, and it all makes sense because we are competing with other school districts in this case. You talked about police officers and fire department and city workers and all that, but like just on the school level, we're seeing it that way too. And we've been forced to come up, and that money has to come from someplace. So those conversations, they're actually easier decisions than I would have thought. Like, it's like, yes, we have to pay our bus drivers because we don't have enough of them, and they provide the service for the kids. So like the easy answer is to, yes, match the wages of another local community. But where that money comes from, once you have to do this across the board, people aren't going to like it because it's going to hit the taxpayer, and it just hasn't been fun.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, there are other issues too. I saw yesterday, it's a news story about how the state wants to attract teachers, and they were talking about housing. Well, you know, Jeremy's already crossed that bridge saying, I can't hire anybody from out of state because I can't find a house for them. And Joanne Fisk has said the same thing. So where are you going to get these workers from out of state? Where are you going to put them? No. So will the city have to build housing for public servants?
And then it gets back to what we said. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought we lost at least a handful of teachers that had committed to roles in our school system because of what you said, that they ended up just kind of rescinding on their agreement to come teach in the district because of the housing problem. So
yeah, that's exactly true.
You know, so it's tough times on that front. On the other side of things, why are you hopeful about Biddeford's future?
Because I compare economic development sort of like a wave. When I first started as mayor, trying to get someone to invest in Biddeford was almost impossible. Mm-hmm. You know, the emptied stores on Main Street, the dilapidated mills, the lack of traffic in the downtown. Nobody wanted to invest here. I remember bringing a guy named Anthony Allen, who owns Otto's Pizza, to come to Biddeford 10 years ago. And he came here, we met at Elements and stuff like that. And he drove by Biddeford all the time, but had never ever stopped by because he lived in the Boston area. Mm-hmm. He didn't know it was a university town. He didn't even know it was coastal. He knew nothing about it. But there was no interest in it because, again, in Allen, the downtown's dead. You know? So the key was to find someone to invest. So we had some. Elements, for example. Mm-hmm. They were one of the pioneers. And I clearly remember people saying, oh, Alan, we don't need another coffee shop. We got Dunkin', right? Why would you want to come here? Well, they came here and they found a niche.
It's a freaking zoo every time I go there. It's insane.
Yeah. Palestine is the same way. Alan, I'm not paying $14 for a hamburger. Guess what? They're there. Mm-hmm. So those two entities made it successfully. And when you couple that with a MERC closure, all of a sudden other investors, and of course the professionalism of the City Hall, other investors began to come to Biddeford and they found a niche. Mm-hmm. So that if you look up and down Main Street, you don't have very many open spaces anymore. So the wave is moving forward, and I think there are other people that can catch it. The thing that everybody has to remember is eventually the wave crashes. Yeah. So, you know, it's not unlimited, but I think at this juncture in time, we still have plenty of time and options in terms of making sure that economic development continues, and everybody benefits from that. Yep. I need to point out that the investment in the downtown, you know, because people complain about this, why do you focus on Main Street? So what are we going to brag about? Oh, we got great strip malls. You want to come to Biddeford? No. Mm-hmm. People are proud of their downtowns. They brag about it. And we emphasized it by emphasizing, you know, putting more money into lighting and flowers and Christmas stuff and all this other stuff so that people have some pride, which they do, and they brag about it. But the money being generated there, believe it or not, has stabilized taxes. It would be far worse had we not had that development and all that tax income coming in.
Yep. And there are other communities in southern Maine that I see taxes being much worse, and we could have easily been in that boat as well. Yep. So Marty got elected a few weeks back, gets inaugurated next week, I believe. Do you have any advice for him? Do you give him any advice, or you just kind of let him do his own thing?
I think he has to find his own identity. I mean, he and I have talked. We're good friends, and I really think he'll do a fine job. But he has to find his own niche and work on his own particular skills, because if he tries to be like me, it's not going to work. Just like if I try to be like him, it's not going to work. Mm-hmm. I've told him to to rely on his department heads. Don't view them as the enemy. Trust their instincts and trust their expertise, and be able to work with your counselors. Give them credit, work with them, and I think if you view things as a team and not as an individual, it just makes things so much better because everybody shares in the enthusiasm.
I'm excited. I'm excited about his term and what he brings to the office of the mayor, and I think he's going to do a great job. So definitely looking forward to that. And I honestly, that's all that I want to have you on to talk about. I want to talk kind of about your career as mayor. I mean, I've never been more proud to say that I'm from Biddeford than I am right now, and I think a lot of that has to do with you and the job that you've done as mayor. So I want to say thank you to you for doing a great job, and I appreciate everything you've done.
Well, I'll emphasize it again. You got to look at staff and you got to look at counselors, because I really lucked out.
Mm-hmm.
I told this story the other night at the council meeting, when I coached ice hockey. I don't know if you remember, I coached ice hockey for a while.
I did not know that. That's funny.
Yeah, I coached ice hockey at the high school for a while. And one year we had a coaches meeting in Lewiston High School, which used to have 125 kids trying out. And I used to have like 25. They had trouble finding a coach. So at the last minute, they hired a football coach. And I remember talking to him. I said, wait a minute, how are you going to do this? Because you've never coached hockey. You've never played hockey. How are you going to do this? He said, Alan, I've got the horses. I'm going to let them run. That son of a gun won the state title.
That's
because
so
he allowed people with talent, obviously he guided them and steered them a bit, but he let them do what they could do. Mm-hmm. And so when you look at City Hall and you see all this talent, why inhibit them by political decisions? Let them do what they're trained to do, because the proof's in the pudding.
That's good advice right there, too. That's a great story. I did not know you coach hockey. That's too funny.
It was a good time.
God, that's awesome. Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to me. This is one I've been looking forward to doing, or one that I knew that I wanted to do since I started the podcast about a year and a half ago. So I knew that we'd time it up at some point when you were wrapping up your term as mayor.
Yeah, waiting for my retirement.
Yeah, I mean, hey, it's fun to kind of talk about things. Hey, like you said, you have plenty of time right now anyways. So what the heck? Now seems like as good a time as any.
That's right.
Yeah. So thanks again for your service. I will look forward to seeing you next week at the inauguration.
All right. I'll be there.
All right.
If you hear anybody heckling, it's not me.
All right. Thanks, bud.
All right. See you later.